Yo, what's up? This is Nintendo Fanboy Mark. Do you like Game Boy? I like Game Boy. Welcome to Best Game Boy Reviews by Classic Game Room, a fun collection of some of my favorite Game Boy reviews that I've produced over the years for games like Pac-Man, Mortal Kombat II, Double Dragon 3, Quarth, Dead Heat, Scramble, Jurassic Park, and let's kick this off with one of my favorites, Metroid II on the Game Boy. Enjoy.
Welcome to a very special Classic Game Room because this is the review of Metroid 2 and it's the very last Classic Game Room being filmed at this location. We're moving to a bigger, better intergalactic space arcade, so let's get our magic beer of teleportation power and prepare to move. Welcome to Classic Game Room, coming to you from the new intergalactic space arcade, which is like Death Star sized. And it's still under construction, as you can tell from the echo. Dark, cavernous, and filled with enemies. Like this game, it's Metroid 2 on the Game Boy. It's also like 150 degrees in here. There's no air conditioning yet. So this beer's tasting mighty fine. Yes, finally, room to grow. We don't have the shelving, lighting, disco ball, or the stuff hanging from the ceiling yet, but the gravity simulator is performing adequately. Metroid II, The Return of Samus, is the 1991 sequel to Metroid, the iconic Nintendo hit on the Nintendo Entertainment System, where Samus returns to shoot more things, jump in the air while spinning, and look good doing it. Now that we all know she's a babe. Not to give away the ending for the first game. Sorry to those of you who haven't played it. She's a chick. That was like the biggest ending ever back in the day. This game has a far less exciting ending where you find out that Samus has a twin sister who dated your roommate in college. The strange sound effects and uncertainty of where you're going add to Metroid 2's unique, eerie quality. You never know what weird sound will attack you next. I always make a mess out of these boss battles, but eventually get through them. You know, the first Metroid was one of the big games that showed that home console games, on the NES in particular, could be larger adventures, rather than the traditional short, fast arcade games from the early 80s. And it was dark, stylish, and eerie, in contrast to Super Mario Bros. And most of the other NES games at the time. By 1990-91, these side-scrolling adventure games were pretty well established, and game systems like the NES, Sega Genesis, and Super Nintendo were delivering some pretty awesome games, so Metroid 2 takes that home console experience and brings it onto the small screen of the Game Boy. And it's a kick-ass game. In fact, one of the best Game Boy games that you can get, period. This is the first time I've ever played Metroid 2. I played around with the first one again right before I picked this one up, just to sort of refresh my memory. I actually prefer Metroid 2 over Metroid 1. I think it's pretty much more of the same. There's just more stuff. Look at the reflection. This is real. I'm terrible at this game, so I'm so happy that I actually got something. I did something right without being eaten by aliens. Always a good thing. Like the first game, Metroid 2 is a dark, stylish 2D action-adventure game, where you explore caverns, blow things up, and upgrade your weapons and attributes like jumping, spinning, and all-around well-being, aka health. The more you explore, the more you'll find, and don't forget to kill these things, the Super Metroids or whatever they are. Hit the select button to switch to missiles. You can't slap these, I tried. For the most part, Metroid 2 isn't terribly difficult, but there's a few places where you can easily get stuck, and one of these creatures will just pin you against a wall, and you'll be done. Also, it's easy to get lost. So, this is actually best played with a pencil and paper, or the internet, which I guess is the more common way to do it now. Basically, you'll want a map. Spread throughout this dark, endless world of caverns, there's save game points, and you can save your game, which is a really nice feature. However, if you get lost and can't make your way back to a save game point in time before the alien things get you, then, well, you'll wish you had listened to me and made a map. As you can see, there's hidden things everywhere, so make sure to explore every part of the game. And, it's pretty straightforward from there. It's just a good, solid action-adventure game on the Game Boy. In fact, this would be a good, solid action game on the Super Nintendo. Well, it kind of is here on the Super Game Boy, I guess. Also, this is available on the Virtual Console. It's one of Nintendo's big games. I recommend you play it. Yay, the wave beam. Now I can wave at my friends. Uh-oh, that's the I'm low on health warning. Better find a save game point. I hope I don't run into any of these things on my way. Oh, now I'm screwed. Thankfully, I do save a lot. In fact, what I would do is save a game, find a Metroid thing, shoot it, go back, resave my game, and just sort of tiptoe further into the caverns to find the next one. I really like Metroid II, and I'm not always into these games. Just something about this one works really well on the Game Boy Advance SP in particular. So if you enjoy the first one or played it back in the day and have fond memories, I highly, highly recommend Metroid II on your Nintendo device of choice. Except the Virtual Boy, I don't think it works on that. I never did figure out the best color combination while playing on the Super Game Boy, but I think Samus likes kittens, so this one seems appropriate.
Welcome to Classic Game Room. Let's kick off Fighting Game Week with one of the biggies on the small screen. This is Mortal Kombat 2 on the Game Boy. Fatality! It's Mortal Kombat 2, the sequel to Mortal Kombat 1 for the Nintendo Game Boy. And I'm pretty sure the kitten background on the Super Nintendo's Super Game Boy was made just for this. If you've been watching Classic Game Room for a while, you know I'm not a huge Mortal Kombat fan. It's true, my favorite Mortal Kombat is the movie. I love the movie, it's great. But back in the day, playing games in the arcade, I was always more of a Street Fighter II guy. And when there was a line at that machine, I played Pit Fighter, because it's just awesome. Same thing. And I think it's fair to say that Mortal Kombat 2 on the Game Boy is exactly what you would expect from Mortal Kombat 2 on the Game Boy. I mean, really, how much did they have to work with? I would say it's an improvement over the first game on the Game Boy. It seems to be a little bit more playable, but maybe I'm just in a better mood today, I don't know. It's Fighting Game Week here at Classic Game Room. What's not to like? Well, this isn't a spectacular game by any means. If you were a Mortal Kombat fan back in the day with a Game Boy and you were stuck in detention, this would have gotten the job done. But it's lacking all of the stuff that I think people like about Mortal Kombat, like the weird digitized people, the blood, the screaming and the sound effects. The style of Mortal Kombat is what made Mortal Kombat popular, I think. Not so much the gameplay. If you wanted gameplay, you went for Street Fighter II. But that's just my opinion. I'm the guy that likes Pit Fighter, so what the hell do I know? The controls are pretty much the same as they are in all the other versions of Mortal Kombat. The graphics are as you see them, and the sound is as you hear it. But I would cut this game some slack. I mean, considering how bad most of the fighting games are on the original Game Boy, Mortal Kombat II remains playable and moderately faithful, somewhat faithful, to the original, at least in terms of controls. And admittedly, that's a bit of a backhanded compliment. There we go, I killed him by boring him to death while trying to poorly execute another fatality. I remember lunch period back in the day when people would just sit around with a notebook and talk about all the fatalities they figured out before the internet. Like, it was a really big deal to figure out the fatalities. They're really not all that exciting in this version of the game anyway. If you really want to play Mortal Kombat 2, there's far better ways to do that, in any number of collections available on other game systems. I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send all the way to Morgan from Clarksville, Tennessee. Thank you, Morgan, for sending Mortal Kombat 2 to the show. Well, it's not great, it's better than Double Dragon 3 on the Game Boy, you've got to admit that. If you want that green monochromatic version of Mortal Kombat 2 on the go, then here you go, it's Mortal Kombat 2 on the Nintendo Game Boy. What do you do while waiting in line to play Pac-Man in the arcades? In addition to watching Classic Game Room on your phone, you play Pac-Man on your Game Boy. Released in 1990, this is a terrific old-school portable version of Pac-Man that plays well on the old black and white or old green and darker green screen, as well as the brighter Game Boy Advance SP and the Retron 5, which I'll show you in a moment. I love Pac-Man, this is Pac-Man month, and I'm impressed with the Game Boy release. The controls take a bit of time to get used to, especially after you've been playing like 15 different versions of Pac-Man over the past week like this guy. This one isn't quite as responsive as the NES one, but it's close. As close as you're going to get on the Game Boy. My favorite way to play this is actually on the GBA SP, which I'll show you right now. The miracle of editing. The miracle of the Game Boy Advance SP. Notice how it's subtle, but it gives the game a bit more color so you can just ever so slightly more easily identify the ghosts when they're vulnerable. It's the Game Boy version. There are limitations. You can't tell the different colors of the ghosts, and that's troublesome when trying to plan your moves. If you're used to the game and looking at what color ghost is chasing you, because they all behave slightly differently. Here's Pac-Man on the Retron 5. This will also play on Super Game Boy and the Game Boy adapter for GameCube, by the way. Straight up black and white, but it's crisp, it's clear, it's Pac-Man. I love what they did with the sound here. This sounds amazing on the Game Boy, and it has the cutscenes and the music, too. Is this the best version of Pac-Man out there? No, but it was definitely the best version on the Game Boy in 1990. It was also the only version on the Game Boy in 1990. But I think they did a great job given the limitations of the Game Boy's black and white screen. It was never going to be perfect, but this is way, way better than I expected. And it's so dirt cheap these days. So if you're like me, and you're just going old school, whipping out the Game Boy at the bar, the original one, which impresses everyone, by the way. Everyone loves the Game Boy.
It's not even like a weird hipster thing to do. It's just cool. Anyway, Game Boy, Pac-Man, good. That's all you need to know. And as we continue to celebrate Pac-Man month, I'll plug my book, Pac-Man Collector's Guide, a definitive review on Amazon.com, where I have some beautiful photos of this version of the game. Play it on Game Boy, play it on GBA SP, play it on Super Game Boy, or wherever Game Boy games can be played. I'll be looking at some other Pac-Mans soon, like the Dreamcast release in Namco Museum, MSX, Pac-Man, and Pac-Man Jr. on Atari 7800. Get ready for it. See you next time on Classic Game Room. Banished from Earth, Classic Game Room broadcasts from the Intergalactic Space Arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome to Classic Game Room. Every now and then I encounter a Game Boy game that really impresses me, and this is one of them. It's Dead Heat Scramble for your Game Boy. The best games on the Game Boy are games that are fun but reasonably simple. Games like Tetris, for example. Although I'd rather play this than Tetris. It's Dead Heat Scramble. All the way from 1990, a racing game, and racing games in particular can frequently struggle on the Game Boy's small screen. Or the big screen, depending on the game. How about racing a truck through a giant half-pipe? Dead Heat Scramble doesn't really say what this game is, and after looking at the cartridge artwork initially, I thought it was going to be an RC Pro-Am clone. And sometimes those can be really bad, but this doesn't play like RC Pro-Am at all. It's actually a pretty clever racing game that manages to work really well on the Game Boy screen, the big screen, or the Game Boy Advance SP, which is where I got my high score, so that's the one I recommend. As you can see, you can drive right through traffic, and you'll want to do that because sometimes you'll get a power-up. And when you get to about level 4, you won't get through the level unless you have some power-ups. Also, Dead Heat Scramble has a few things in common with Sega's Mighty Outrun. There's like 2 different levels of crashing. There's crashing that kind of slows you down, and then there's completely wiping out, which effectively ends your race, because you'll never make up that lost time. There's numerous obstacles in the half-pipe to avoid, like giant boulders, how'd they get there, barriers, and of course, some sharp turns. You have 3 vehicles to choose from. To be honest, I really didn't see any difference between them. And several power-ups, including a time freeze, turbo boost, extra grippy tires, missile, and invincibility, which is the best one. Try to knock as many vehicles out of your way as possible. That obviously gets way harder the further you progress into the game. I actually like the music in Dead Heat Scramble, but the sound effect when your time is running out is super irritating. In order to avoid that, just finish the race before your time runs out. It's easy, right? No, not so much. This game actually gets really tough really fast. It'll require some half-pipe tube memorization, and also quite a bit of luck. Power-ups are completely random and they make a huge difference.
You can score some bonus points if you do really well, but the main challenge is just making it through each segment of track. I found that at the end of each stage I was just trying to run into every car and get either the time freeze or invincibility. It's intense. If you lose, you'll be dead, heated, and then scrambled. That's what the title stands for. I like this one. You'll never hear about it, but it's fun, it's quirky, plays really well on the Game Boy or Game Boy Advance or whatever. And I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Corey from Nashville, Tennessee for sending this to the show. Thank you, Corey. Dead Heat Scramble. Won't cost you much, and it's totally worth it. Be forewarned, by level 5, this game is brutal. You can continue, but then you lose your score. And where's the fun in that? Dead Heat Scramble. Super highly recommended for your Game Boy. The little bit of added color on the Game Boy Advance SP looks the best, I think. Of course, that's my favorite Game Boy. This game rocks. There are many Game Boys, but this one is mine. Good old Game Boy. And if we take a look at the cartridge artwork here for Dead Heat Scramble, you can see it's actually licensed. It's got the Nissan logo on there. I didn't realize that until I was looking at it on the monitor here. Plug this guy into my trusty pink Game Boy Advance SP. Up the brightness and turn it on. Looks good. Gets a bit of added color. So there you have it. Good times are had wherever Dead Heat Scramble is at. As long as you have some Game Boys. Which you should if you're watching this show. Come on, we all have a Game Boy. Banished from Earth Classic Game Room broadcasts from the Intergalactic Space Arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome to another very special classic game room for the review of Quarth on the Game Boy. It's like Tetris meets Space Invaders, and it's called Quarth. Quarth, you're touching your brain. Few games have a name that really impressed me like this one, Quarth. I love that name. I'm gonna have to start naming characters after this for other games. Kind of like Zaxxon, another one of my favorite names. Quarth is originally a 1989 arcade machine from Konami. This is produced under the Ultra brand, which was basically Konami, for the Game Boy. Quarth can easily be described as a cross between Tetris and Space Invaders, and it's really good. What you do is relatively simple. You try to make rectangles or squares out of everything and then clear them off the screen before they touch the bottom and kill you. But in practice, it's actually complicated, and there's a lot of strategy. After spending some time with this game, while I've really enjoyed it, I feel like I've only just started to scratch the surface of Quarth and the best ways to play the game, because you can look at shapes and try to make bigger shapes out of them if they can somehow turn into a giant rectangle, and you score more points for that. But of course, as the game progresses, it gets faster and faster, and way, way harder and harder. There, see, I did something right, and I get a little power up, and I'm not exactly sure how those work since I don't have the instructions, but sometimes they'll make you faster or freeze the game a little bit. And it works well in the Game Boy because it's not too complicated. Also, I like the music. It's catchy and fits the gameplay style nicely. As I'm watching the footage here, I'm noticing all of the moves I could have made but didn't because I was rushing while trying not to get squashed.
The more I play this game, the more I try to get fancy and make larger and larger shapes, and that usually results in a lower score. Playing it safe sometimes works better. If you see a simple shape, just get rid of it, score a few points, and then survive to fight another day. Quarthing it up. Quarth-tastic. Quarth. I've never seen the arcade game. In fact, I never even heard of it until I saw this. But now I want to play it. I can't imagine it's all that much better in the arcade though, but it makes for a kick-ass Game Boy game. There's a lot of games on the Game Boy that tried to do too much and failed miserably because of it, but not Quarth. You know how Tetris was like the perfect Game Boy game? Well, so is this. Simple, yet effective. And it's fun, highly addictive. Great risk versus reward arcade-style gameplay. That's the beauty of Quarth. That and the fact that it's just called Quarth, which is also just cool. So long, Zaxxon, my next RPG character is gonna be Quarth. Welcome to Classic Game Room, where I'm bringing the turtle power from 1991. This is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, back from the sewers, from whence they came, on the Game Boy. The Turtles return from 1991 to put you in your place. This game is merciless. Like many titles from the era, it starts off easy, and then quickly crushes you, without mercy, which is what merciless means. Extremely difficult back when kids' games put up a fight. In fact, they made kids cry. This made me weep today because it's filled with cheap enemies that come out of nowhere and deplete your health. Fortunately, there's pizza everywhere, including the graffiti on the side of the wall. Nice touch. From Konami, it's Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 back from the sewers, released in '91 for the Game Boy. I don't think this is a tie-in with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, the movie. It doesn't have the Vanilla Ice song, so it can't possibly be related. That was the best part of that movie by far. It's a side-scrolling action beat-em-up kind of game with impossibly hard boss battles, lots of cheap enemies, and some great music. All four turtles are here: Leonardo, Donatello, Mussolini, and Bob. Wait, no, that's not their names. Michelangelo, Raphael, Leonardo, and Donatello. It's been a long time since I've played a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles game. I think when I was a teenager, which sadly was a long time ago. For most of the game, you walk to the right and beat up whatever's near you. Occasionally, it goes into more of a Streets of Rage style of gameplay where you can wander about. And then you fight end bosses, which will make you want to throw your Game Boy out the window. But don't do that because it's a classic now. You would be defiling the magic of the Game Boy. And that's illegal. Somewhere. For the most part, this reminds me of Revenge of Shinobi with turtles, and well, there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually pretty good. Provided you have the time to memorize some levels, and particularly those tricky end boss battles. Oh, I love those things. They're great. And you know what would be particularly embarrassing? If I died within sight of pizza. Oh, I did that. As you can see, the game looks nice on the actual Game Boy. It fills the screen nicely and gets the job done, although I would recommend the Super Game Boy or Game Boy Advance SP. And look at this, I'm fighting Ed 209 from RoboCop. I didn't know that two of them knew each other. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Back from the Sewers is totally worth playing if you're a fan of the Turtles or if you were a fan of the Turtles and want to get your ass kicked in a 2D side-scrolling adventure game. The music is great, but watch out for those cheap and dirty enemies. They're everywhere. How about a scene where the turtles get crushed by boulders and then lit on fire and shot at by dudes with missile launchers? If this were made today, you would earn experience points, level up, and then get some kind of cheat after a couple tries to help you through the level. Because everyone is entitled to win. Well, not back then. These games made you cry. What was one of the aliens doing in the sewers? Interesting. This game was sent to the show by our friend Satoshi from Chester, Virginia. Thank you very much for reminding me that I'm hungry for pizza and I suck at games. Why wouldn't you be ninja fighting on jet-propelled floating platforms? It only makes sense. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Back from the Sewers. Thanks again, Satoshi, and thanks to Konami for making me cry. Satoshi also asks how the weather is here. Well, it's cold and there's no atmosphere. Don't open the window. People ask me all the time, Mark, what killed the dinosaurs? Because, I'm such an expert and all. Was it meteors, Lord Carnage, laser discs? Who can say? But I can tell you for sure there's a lot of them in this game. It's Jurassic Park on the Game Boy. The original Jurassic Park film, released in 1993, blew me away when I saw it on the big screen with its revolutionary use of CGI to drop you onto an island filled with dinosaurs. Now that's all well and good, but is it as impressive on the small monochromatic screen? Well, no, but the music's pretty good. While it's hardly a revolutionary game, I've got to admit it's better than I expected it to be, just like Jurassic World. Seriously, I expect every movie these days to be crap. And while it was really nothing more than a big-budget, well-executed mashup of Godzilla and Aliens, it was entertaining. There was a sad lack of Jeff Goldblum in the film, though. I feel like he really made the first one. Sam Neill was excellent, too. Anyway, back to this game, where you basically just run around and collect eggs and shoot dinosaurs and then open doors and move on to the next level. It's really not all that great, but for what it is, I think this one would have been enjoyable back in 1993 or 94 on the Game Boy. As you can see, it actually looks pretty good on the small screen. It plays well enough, given the limitations of the Game Boy. Honestly, it could have been a whole lot worse. On the other hand, it could have been a whole lot better, too. Some of the parts, like the exploration and shooting dinosaurs, are pretty cool, but this level sucks. What, you're supposed to be avoiding stampeding dinosaurs and your friend is too slow to get out of the way? Well, that's his fault. Let him get trampled. I've saved Tim from being crushed. Great, I'll feed him to the dinosaurs later. The star of the game is not Jeff Goldblum, it's the music, actually. Who would have thought Jurassic Park on the Game Boy has some kick-ass tunes? But it does. It's really good. The game does a nice job mixing it up with different level variations and whatnot. Here's one where you're paddling up a stream that looks like it's filled with blood and dinosaurs. Now, one thing to keep in mind, unless you're following an internet walkthrough, avoid the question mark boxes. Most of those will kill you. They're far more dangerous than the carnivorous dinosaurs with sharp teeth. Boxes with question marks. Deadly. Also, never run out of ammo, then you're screwed. You cannot jump on top of the dinosaurs and try to kick their shells into oncoming enemies. I tried.
The thing is, there's 1,000,001 Game Boy games. Some of them are good, some of them are god-awful, others are right in the middle, like Jurassic Park on the Game Boy. Love this tune. This one's okay. In some respects, it's actually pretty impressive for a Game Boy game. On the other hand, I can't think of too many reasons that you need to run out and buy it today, because there's better Jurassic Park games, like the one on Sega Genesis. Unless you had this one as a kid and you loved playing it and you're looking to relive a feeling of nostalgia, I'd just pass on it. However, I do have a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Jason from Green Bay, Wisconsin. Thank you, Jason. Thank you for sending giant dinosaurs in a tiny package. Why am I being attacked by dolphins in this level? Dolphins aren't dinosaurs, they're fish. I mean, they're not, but they could be. They could be robot fish masquerading as mammals. Don't mess with science unless there's lots of money involved. It's Jurassic Park. Best enjoyed on Laserdisc. Welcome to Classic Game Room, coming to you from the Intergalactic Space Arcade, where it's always time to get your Game Boy on, especially with this game. It's Super Mario Land 2, 6 golden coins. Like a pocket full of nickels. Oh yeah, it's time to step to the real. It's time to step to Super Mario Land 2 from 1992. 6 golden coins. Which doesn't sound like a lot, but what's the price of gold these days? That's probably a fortune! Not that Mario needs it. This one is an original Game Boy release that plays well on the Game Boy, Super Game Boy, Game Boy Advance SP, and the Nintendo 3DS from the Virtual Console. You have to download it for that. Don't try to insert your actual Game Boy cartridge into the 3DS. It requires a great deal of pressure, pliers, and some duct tape. And even then it won't work. This is a pretty straightforward Mario side-scrolling platforming adventure, and most of you who are fans of this series have probably already played it. And I don't want to give away the ending or any spoilers, but something super secret special happens if you collect all 6 coins. And I'm not sure if it's ever actually been captured on video, so you know what? I am going to give away the ending of the game. Here it is. Now that's just fabulous. An ending worth playing for, but kind of an oversight on their part because now you can't play this game on it. On the plus side, though, you can enjoy Sonic 16 bits and color. But anyway, back to the game, which as you can see has Mario-style platforming, great music, and solid Nintendo production values. As well as traditional values like crushing all of the enemies in this game for gold, otherwise known as genocide. Who says Mario doesn't have a dark side? Make sure to thoroughly explore each level. As you probably know, there's things hidden everywhere, including lots of coins that you can collect and then try to gamble away on extra lives. You can also replay levels over and over again. We get the world map, and this game features the debut of Wario. I'll take a 20 up, thank you, because I can use it. Now, most of you won't need that many lives because, frankly, this isn't one of the harder Mario games, which is good for me, because I'm terrible at them. That doesn't stop me from having a good time playing it, though. If you're like me and you enjoy these games, but you suck at them, try this one. Super Mario Land 2 is a great platformer for the Game Boy. It plays well even on the old one. I think it fits the screen nicely. The level designs are pretty clever as you'll explore them thoroughly, collect your 6 coins, and spend them on a Sega Genesis. I think they removed that feature for the 3DS version, though.
You'll definitely want to avoid the saws and razor blades trying to cut Mario in half, but do collect the things that look like carrots because he'll grow ears that he can flap and float through levels. I wish I had ears that did that. I wish I had a flamethrower. The controls work as they should for a Mario game, and I think the action on screen fits the small screen nicely. One word of caution though, do not try to clean your Game Boy cartridges, or game packs or whatever they are, with a Q-tip and alcohol. Because right before I recorded the footage for this, I erased all of my old games and like 90 lives. Way to go me! Just blow on it instead. Aren't I horrible at these games? If only it had helicopters blowing up dinosaurs. But, sadly, it doesn't. It does have one of the greatest endings in video game history, though, and it introduces Wario, who also doesn't work on the Genesis. Really, what were they thinking? In conclusion, Super Mario Land 2 6 Golden Coins is an excellent game and an important piece of Nintendo history. It's not a terribly long game, but it's tons of fun, best enjoyed with a backlit screen of some kind, and you can typically find it out there for a good price or just download it from the VC. It's Super Mario Land 2, and you'll definitely want a spare Game Boy on hand in the event that you beat the game. Welcome to Classic Game Room, where we're about to rock it like Herbie Hancock on the Game Boy with Missile Command. Would you like to play a game? Yes. I love the cheerful, uplifting music that they added to the menus here in 1991's Missile Command for the Nintendo Game Boy. The portable version of Atari's 1980 arcade classic about the fun you can have surviving a global thermonuclear war. This actually plays pretty well considering the limitations of the Game Boy, but the first thing you'll notice, in addition to the missing trackball, is that you only have two missile bases from which to launch missiles. Alpha Base and Omega Base. Thanks to budget cuts, we no longer have a Delta Base. Or it's because the Game Boy only has two buttons. And it doesn't even have a trackball, yet somehow it still manages to play a pretty good game of Missile Command. This may be the ultimate irony, playing Missile Command on the Game Boy while sitting next to an actual Missile Command, but if you have to go somewhere, like on a bus or train or airplane, try lugging this thing around with you. You're better off playing this version. Unless you book the seat next to you and just take that with a generator. This is true, that's how I travel with a Vectrex, but the Missile Command machine is approaching 400 pounds, and it's quite large. I'm a huge fan of the game, obviously, which is why I have one in the editing suite right next to the Outdoor Simulation Wall 9000. Your nuclear weapons can't get through my shield of defense, my shield of 80s awesomeness. That's right, it's like the video game equivalent of watching Red Dawn. Whenever you step up to a game of Missile Command, it's always the Cold War, no matter what year it is. Now for the younger viewers who may not be familiar with Missile Command, back in the day we had threats other than just terrorists, biological weapons, plagues, disease, aliens, robots, and being invaded by the Canadians. We had to worry about the constant threat of global thermonuclear war. Missile Command is basically a training exercise where you're supposed to shoot down all of the enemy ICBMs before they nuke your cities and irradiate your population. Now, one of the things I like about this version of Missile Command is that you're defending real cities. For example, I've just failed to protect Sydney. I'm sorry. Or should I say you're welcome, because now it's time for the Road Warrior. You see, that's the great thing about losing Missile Command, because then the game turns into something else, like Fallout, Wasteland, or maybe even the alternate cut of War Games, where Matthew Broderick and Ali Sheedy just weren't fast enough and it turns into the day after. Not tomorrow, because that movie was terrible. Yes! A bonus city! Fortunately, this smaller, truncated version of Missile Command is not terrible, even without a trackball, even on the black and white, old-school Game Boy screen with only 2 missile bases. It's pretty good. It's good because it's Missile Command, universally likable. Even without a trackball, the game is still playable, although it is best with a trackball, of course. And you can tell this is a post-Cold War version because here I am defending Moscow. That raises an interesting question. Who's launching the missiles? The Sasquatch. I laugh at the inferior missiles trying to destroy me. Except for that one. It actually did destroy me. Oh no! Whenever you lose a game of Missile Command, it automatically turns into a game of Moon Patrol. Missile Command is a great game and it makes for a fine release on the Game Boy. This was sent to the show by our friend Athanasios from Nia Smyrni in Greece. And hopefully I pronounced it correctly. Although given my track record, probably not. Thank you once again, Athanasios. I like this game a lot. I think it's a terrific portable version of Missile Command. If you're taking a trip and you need your 80s fix of arcade-style global thermonuclear war, then try to bring this version of Missile Command with you instead of the full-size arcade machine. It's much easier to fit into your luggage. Welcome to Classic Game Room. Do you like blowing up things with spaceships on the go? Then you're going to love this. It's Nemesis for the Game Boy from Ultra. Looks a lot like Gradius from Konami. I wonder if they're the same company. Yes, they are. Back when Nintendo tried to prevent publishers from spamming their game consoles with a large amount of crappy games, they limited them to a certain number of games per year. Konami's solution was just to create another company, Ultra. And this is Nemesis, which is basically Gradius on the Game Boy. Those familiar with Gradius, Life Force, or Salamander will know what to do here. Blow up everything that moves with your spaceship while collecting power-ups and options. Don't forget the shield, the most important one of all. Nemesis is tough because it's a busy game on the small screen. Although I'm playing it here on the big screen using the Super Game Boy, it's a really nice release. Good music, solid controls, and even when you're playing on the Game Boy, it's relatively easy to see what's going on. Even though it does suffer from some occasional flicker, I'll recommend the Game Boy Advance SP with its backlit screen, as you see here. But even Nemesis, played on the old Game Boy, holds its own. Released in 1990, Nemesis has 5 levels and no online multiplayer. Nemesis gives you a few options, like adding up to 99 extra lives, which is good because you'll need them, although the game does strip you of all of your weapon upgrades if you get blown up. I'm not entirely sure what I did to end up in this super secret level, but hey, I'll take it. It's easier than fighting an end boss, and I love the music. They did a nice job with this one, Nemesis. It sounds cool, and it's a good choice of games for those of you who enjoy spaceship shooters on the go and travel with your Game Boy or Game Boy Advance SP. Yeah, there's better versions of Gradius out there, but this one's on the Game Boy, so show it some respect. Whoops, looks like I took some fire there, but don't worry, I'll regenerate my shield later. One of the keys to getting through this game is to never lose your weapon upgrades. That's stating the obvious, but it's really true. If you get destroyed, which will happen, it knocks you back to your pea shooter with super slow speed. Have fun! Have fun enjoying that good music. Too bad this one didn't come in a special edition with a soundtrack cassette. That would have been rockin'. Ultra rockin'. You know Metal Gear was published under Ultra. That's ultra cool. Nemesis was sent to Classic Game Room by our friend Mark from Brooklyn, New York. Hey Mark, that's a great name. And this is a great game, Nemesis. No relation to the Star Trek movie. I've only got 81 extra lives to go, which may sound like it makes the game easy, but actually it doesn't, because when you get blown up, it backs you up R-Type style. You back that spaceship ass up and wait to get blown up once more. Ship lost? Well, you better find another one because there's more Nemesis to enjoy. So thanks again to Mark, who recently sent a nice collection of games to the show, including one called Mario Brothers? Sounds familiar. Well, until then, it's time to blow things up with spaceships on your Game Boy. It's time for Nemesis.
Welcome to Classic Game Room, where you know I love games that have an "n" in the title. This is Lock 'n' Chase for the Game Boy, which is really good. I know that typically I'm going on and on about the Sega Genesis and the Vectrex and the Atari 2600, but the more time I spend with the Game Boy, the more that I come to appreciate its incredibly deep and eclectic library filled with wonderful games and hidden gems like this. Lock 'n' Chase for the Game Boy is not only one of the best Game Boy games I've played this year, it's one of the best games I've played this year. I used to have this way back when on my Atari 2600, in fact I still do. Don't confuse this version of the game with that one, they're very different. This is based on Data East's 1981 arcade game, Lock 'n' Chase, which is, like so many games back in the day, a Pac-Man clone. But I've always thought it was one of the best Pac-Man clones, and this is like a reboot of Lock 'n' Chase. That feels refreshingly new even though it was released well over 20 years ago. I've been playing this quite a bit lately, and as you can see I recorded footage for this review using the old school Game Boy, Game Boy Advance SP, and the Retron 5. It plays really well on all of those. Like I've said before, Game Boy games are best on the original Game Boy when they don't have a lot of motion, so a relatively simple Pac-Man clone like this plays pretty well on it. What you do may seem fairly simple at first. You gobble dots or coins and avoid the police. Occasionally, money bags will appear in the middle of the screen, collect them for bonus points, and yes, they do increase in value. Also, watch out for that gem that appears in the middle of the screen, which acts as a power pellet, and you can cash those in at the slot machine in between levels. But what really impresses me the most here with this version of Lock 'n' Chase, above and beyond even the playability of the game and the excellent music, is all the little gimmicks that they were able to shove into these levels to enhance the gameplay. Like, it was already good, and now it's better. I love the little buttons where you shrink and swap the police. There's alarm clocks, magic doors, and of course, don't forget to lock the police. trap them behind closed doors so they can't chase you. The animation quality is spectacular and very clever. I love the guy's little feet and his hat in between levels. He takes some mode of transportation to the next bank that he's about to rob. This whole game has a nice attention to detail. And who doesn't love a good slot machine where you can score some bonus lives? Game of the Year contender for 2016? I think so. I mentioned the music earlier, but let's really listen to it here on the Retron 5 in stereo. It's fabulous. To sweeten the deal for you, to make this even better, Lock and Chase doesn't even cost all that much online. You can easily pick up a copy on eBay for a few bucks, and if you do shop through the ClassicGameroom.com website, doesn't cost you any more and it helps the show. Lock and Chase. You absolutely must have this game in your Game Boy collection. It's so good this is worth buying a Game Boy Advance SP, which you should have anyway because the Game Boy Advance SP is amazing. Still my favorite handheld. It's even better than the Gamecom. Maybe not at killing people, but it's definitely better at playing games, and like so many other games here on Classic Game Room, I have a shout out and thank you to send to Mark and Suzanne from East Meadow, New York. Again, thank you. You always have great taste in games, and this is just a terrific Game Boy find. And the fact that it's not rare and doesn't have Zelda means it's cheap. Magic doors! This game has everything. Lock and Chase. Chase and lock your way to the Game Boy. Highly recommended.
Cheers and welcome back to Classic Game Room, where I'm reviewing a game called Soccer on the Game Boy. Soccer. You think they could have come up with a more exciting title for this one? Maybe Death Super Action Laser Soccer. Or Australian Rules Football. You can play soccer or football almost anywhere on a field, in the desert, and traffic underwater, and now on your Game Boy thanks to 1994's Soccer. A very unimaginative title. It's not even international soccer or pro soccer. Soccer versus Street Fighter 7. It's just soccer. Soccer. Soccer? I hardly know her. From Denton Designs, Elite Systems, and Rage Software, we get Soccer on the go in black and white. Or at least green and black if you're playing on the old school Game Boy. I would say this is a pretty ambitious title, considering it's a late release, a 1994 release for the Game Boy. That's actually quite playable and has a lot of stuff going on screen at once. Soccer's biggest problem, like the title, is that it just doesn't really stand out amid a sea of other soccer games. Also, I think it's hard to see on the old Game Boy. It's much better on the Game Boy Advance SP or the Super Game Boy player. Some color does this game a lot of good. You're the guy with the red arrow, or it's just black or murky on the old Game Boy. It's a lot easier to tell what's going on with some color. This plays like any other old school soccer game if you've ever played a soccer video game before. You can dive right into this and enjoy soccer. I think it automatically chooses which player you're controlling. You can pass, you can kick, and then on defense you can slide tackle and stealth kill. Wait, let me check my notes again. Sorry, I meant kick the ball. Sometimes I get those things confused. Although I do think stealth kills will get you a red card. And you can cash those in for weapon upgrades. Now, the rest of the game is pretty straightforward. You can choose from one of several countries, play a friendly match, or a tournament. One nice feature is that you can adjust your squads, and the game puts up a pretty nice level of competition depending on who you're playing. Apparently, in 1994, Germany has a far superior soccer team than Japan. In fact, I'm playing as Germany right now, although every country looks the same. This game was sent to the show by my friend Mark in Bremen, Germany. Thank you, Mark. After the game, my team went out and celebrated by listening to the Scorpions, followed by Big in Japan. Unless you're Game Boy Collector Superfan number 1 that needs to own every Game Boy game, I'd say that you could probably pass on soccer. Not because it's bad or poorly made, just because it's pretty much outdated by now. There's better soccer games, and there were better soccer games back then. It's not bad for a Game Boy release, so if you're doing some time traveling back to 94 or 95 and you don't want to bring your Nintendo 4DS with you, just bring soccer on the Game Boy. It should give you less of a headache. They really could have made some more exciting music for when you win, though. Come on, Rock You Like a Hurricane would have been fabulous. In fact, I'm gonna play it now. Welcome to Classic Game Room for a wonderful review of a horrible game. This is Double Dragon 3 for the Game Boy, published by Acclaim. Why is it so bad? Well, let's find out together. Share the pain. You know there could be trouble ahead when this is the first thing that you see when you fire up a game. Acclaim. Oh, there's like an 85% chance the game is going to be horrible. The odds are not in your favor. Double Dragon 3 for the Game Boy easily, comfortably fits within that 85%. It's terrible. Maybe it's better if we play it on the old school Game Boy. That way we won't really be able to see how awful it is, right? No, you can still feel it. It's pretty bad. Admittedly, I didn't expect very much from this, because Double Dragon 3, the Rosetta Stone for Sega Genesis, is so bad that it's good. The problem is that on the Game Boy, it's so bad that it's just really bad. For starters, we don't have the amazing Sega Genesis music. Also, the game just plays like crap. It's slow, it's cumbersome, and there's terrible hit detection. You also really need 3 buttons to play Double Dragon 3, and the Game Boy only has 2 buttons. One to punch, one to kick. And if you press them both together, sometimes, about 50% of the time, he'll jump. And jumping is really the only way you can survive in Double Dragon 3. So, the fact that it doesn't work well is kind of a problem. They should have done what they did for Ultraman. Just make the start button the jump button. I mean, that wasn't very good either, but it's better than this. Alright, well, I've been a Double Dragon fan since the NES days, so let's give this game one more chance on the Super Game Boy, which, admittedly, is the best way to enjoy Double Dragon 3 on the Game Boy, but let's take into account that by enjoy, I simply mean the least worst. It's not a great game. In no way, shape, or form is this good. You can play 1 or 2 player, I guess that's kind of interesting, but for the most part it's just clunky, cumbersome, awkward, and not very well made. And, all those things combined mean just pass on this version. There's way better Game Boy games out there, and far better Double Dragon games as well. But that doesn't stop me from giving a huge Classic Game Room shout out and thank you to Athanasios in Athens, Greece, for sending this to the show, along with a bunch of other Game Boy games, many of which are really good. Others are Double Dragon 3. In conclusion, what's most disappointing about Double Dragon 3 on the Game Boy is not that it's a bad game, it doesn't play well, it doesn't look very good. It's that they forgot to include the most essential part of all, the BJ theme.
Where's the BJ theme? What good is a game without a BJ theme? For Billy and Jimmy. Jimmy, yes, watch my review of Double Dragon on the Neo Geo CD to get that one, but seriously, every game should have a BJ theme. Even The Legend of Zelda. Hey, what's up, Zelda? Cue the BJ theme, because it's time to play Double Dragon 3 on the Sega Genesis. What? Banished from Earth, classic game room broadcasts from the intergalactic space arcade on its never-ending mission to review everything. Welcome to Classic Game Room for the review of Kwirk for the Game Boy, which appears to star a tomato with a green mohawk. Enjoy! This game caught my eye because I was looking for a couple Game Boy games to play this month, and I thought this had something to do with the 7-Up Spot, who kinda looks like Kwirk except without a mohawk. So as far as I know, this game has no relation to 7-Up. What is interesting, however, is that it's from Atlas and published by Acclaim. Two companies which, in my mind at least, have absolutely nothing in common. Except for the fact that they brought us this quirky little puzzle game for the Game Boy in 1990. For starters, I am horrific at puzzle games. I don't really like them, I'm not good at them, I have no patience for puzzles. Kwirk is not a game for me, but it might be a game for you, so pay attention. Because it seems like it'd be pretty good if you're into puzzle games. What you're supposed to do, conceptually at least, is pretty simple. Woo! Escape these rooms as quickly as possible. It's not easy. It's not easy for me at least. I'm seriously a brick when it comes to these games. I approach each level not with strategy, but with trial and error, and usually a great deal of complaining. Did you catch the heavy sigh? That's not acting. That was probably my 30th try. For what it's worth, Kwirk plays well, it looks good, and I like the cheerful music. If you get stuck, which happened frequently, you can just restart the level. Hey look, I've got a friend who can suffer in silence with me. Why does Kwirk even want to escape this room? I mean, the rest of the world is pretty horrible. He may as well just stay inside the Game Boy. In some levels, you'll need two characters to work together to escape the room, and there's probably many of you looking at this screen right now thinking, this is really easy, I can see the way out. All that I can see right now is a Frosty from Wendy's. Doesn't that sound delightful? You can almost hear the little gerbils running on their wooden wheels inside my brain. I like the level diversity in Kwirk. There's a whole lot of different puzzles, 3 difficulty settings, and even 2 gameplay modes. 3 if you include a 2-player option. What we're doing here is going up. There's also another mode called Heading Out, where you escape as many of these maze puzzles as possible in a certain time limit and score some bonus points. I'm playing it here on the Retron 5. Still waiting for the Retron 6, which also plays Neo Geo. Woo, look at that! Kwirk escaped the room. It really is painful watching me play this game, isn't it? The only thing that could be worse is watching me play Tetris. I have no patience for Tetris. That game is a communist plot to invade my brain. The original old-school Game Boy was a good platform for puzzle games because these didn't require a lot of motion. So it's pretty easy to play on the Game Boy, or certainly the Game Boy Advance SP, which is what we're watching here. My preferred Game Boy of choice. The bright, vibrant screen doesn't make me any better at it, though like I said, this one's not for me, but it's got potential. I can see it's a nice, well-made puzzle game. I mean, it's from Atlas, right? Then again, it's also from Acclaim. Nah, this one's actually legit. And I've got a classic game room shout out and thank you to send to Corey from Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you, Corey, for sending Kwirk. Thank you for making me feel dumber.
I like the tomato with a mohawk, though. You really can't go wrong with that. While Kwirk suffers from a lack of burning people with monsters and cutting them in half, it can be found eBayisably. On eBay, cheap. If you like the sound of a puzzle game where you play a punk-rocking tomato who escapes rooms, then this one's got you covered. If that doesn't sound fun to you, then there's always Earth Defense Force. Now someone needs to port EDF to the Game Boy. I'd love to see that. Tough to film. They're so tiny. I've got this desk light just blasting air from this direction. Trying to keep the glare off of it as much as possible. So I can come down, look at it like that, and we can analyze the cartridge art. I mean, what's going on here? We've got a tomato with sunglasses. Not sure where a tomato would go to buy sunglasses, or sneakers for that matter. And he seems to be escaping some kind of a dystopian cube society, which is entrenched in a fault line. I think his girlfriend has been buried alive. And this is from Acclaim, who, if you look closely, it says, Masters of the Game. Acclaim.